Chaps, welcome back to SGMMA. Today we're going to be talking about the best and worst performances of UFC stars, and we're starting with the man on the way out, Mr. Dustin Poirier. I have gone with the Eddie Alvarez rematch as his best performance because their first fight ended in a bit of controversy with the no contest. I'm sure you guys know that. If you don't, rewatch that first fight, you'll see what I mean. In the second fight, he just basically mauled him. The first one, I think he was winning, but it was incredibly nip and tuck, and they both had their moments. But it's a brilliant example of a fighter learning from fight one, working on what he needs to work on, and effectively just showing without any kind of doubt that he was the better fighter out of the two in that point of their careers. And it elevated Poirier, in my opinion, up to the fighter that he would become and stay for the rest of his career. That, for me, was a big turning point in the career of both of them, because Alvarez went downhill and Poirier just kept rising. So, yeah, wonderful performance from Poirier that night. And in terms of his worst, yes, he's lost 3 times for the title, but all of those he looked pretty good, especially against Islam most recently, and he had his moments against Oliveira and Khabib as well. I was considering maybe McGregor 1, maybe Jim Miller, but I think the Michael Johnson knockout loss is the one that I'm going to go with, because at the time it felt like he was never really going to make it up to that next level. He was never really in the title picture, and he definitely wasn't. I think it was 2014 where they fought. It may have been a year either side, but yeah, for me, it was the worst night in the career of Dustin Poirier. Because with the McGregor one, you knew he was on the ascension and nobody was really going to stop him. That was right in the early stages of the hype that Conor would build up. And I just think, with your 2025 goggles on, the thought of Michael Johnson starching Dustin Poirier doesn't make any sense. And it was unlikely even then. I was surprised when it happened. I was quite new into MMA at the time. I hadn't been watching for that long, but yeah, it was a massive, massive shock at the time. And it was an off night for Dustin Poirier. I mean, as always, he had his moments. I think he's one of these fighters who will always have a moment in a fight, even if he loses badly. But yeah, it wasn't a good look for DP, and at that point, you could never have expected what he was going to go on to do. So yeah, I think the knockout loss against Michael Johnson was the worst night for Poirier. Let's move on now to former 2-weight world champion, Mr. Alex Pereira. Look at the fucking menace on the geezer's face, and that's just a normal ESPN photo, right? He still looks scary. Either way, his best night for me was Jamahal Hill, UFC 300 main event. Part of the reason for that was what I just said. The opportunity to headline one of, if not the biggest cards in the history of the entire organisation was a massive opportunity, and it rose him up to a level of notoriety that he didn't have before he fought Hill on 300, and everything about it was fantastic. The idea of waving off the ref, and then almost what was kind of like a shovel uppercut / left hook. It was a bit of a mix in between a hook and an uppercut off that lead hand that just completely starched Hill. And then, of course, the celebration afterwards was iconic. It's one of those that you see on your news feed or your shorts feed every so often, and it just kind of makes you smile in a way. One, because Jamahal Hill's annoying and a prick, and also it's one of the few times that Alex has ever really shown like a humorous side or made people laugh, because a lot of the time everything that Alex really does is just kind of scary, but that was a funny moment as well as a devastating moment. It basically had everything that Alex can possibly offer in one moment, and it's one of his more brutal knockouts. I was thinking maybe the Strickland fight or the Yuri rematch, but I think the UFC 300 fight against Hill was his best night. As for his worst, now he's lost against Adesanya, obviously, and of course that was a very bad knockout, but he was winning the fight until he wasn't. It was one of those, a little bit like Leon Edwards and Usman. He was winning the fight quite convincingly in the first round and a half until he got caught, hurt and dropped, and obviously completely put out. And all credit to Adesanya, as much as I dislike him, that was a wonderful night for him. But I'm going to go with the Bruno Silva fight. I think it was his second fight in the UFC, because the first one was at UFC 268, I believe it was. The flying knee on that Greek bloke. And then I think he fought Bruno Silva in the Apex, I think a few months later, I believe it was. And it was dead flat. I mean, if you look at what's happened to Bruno Silva since then, and the people who have been able to beat him and stop him, yeah, it was the most flat that anybody had ever seen Alex. And obviously, this was before any of us knew who he actually was and what he was going to go on to be. So, yeah, I think that was his weakest performance. A guy like Alex should be starching Bruno Silva in as little time as possible. So, yeah, even though it was a win, I think it was his worst outing in the octagon. So his best was the UFC 300 headliner against Hill, and his worst was his Apex bout, his second fight with the UFC against Bruno Silva, for me. We will stick with the Brazilian champions and we'll talk about the flyweight king Alejandro Pantoja now. In terms of his best, he had some really good wins before he became champion. The Manel Cap fight is one that instantly springs into mind. The Wilson Heist win was another good one. But I was thinking Asakura, but I mean, a lot of the new UFC signings have been a bit underwhelming, so I decided I'm just going to go with his most recent one against Kai Kara France, a third round submission, because, excuse me, where was I? Yeah, so the Kai Kara France win it basically showed how well-rounded he is. He did some good work on the feet, and of course, as soon as he hits the ground, everybody knows how dangerous he is on the ground, as well as on the feet. Like I said, he really is a 5-tool pony, which I think you have to be, especially in a lower weight class where all the guys are so technical and skillful. The fact he can mix it up so well is incredibly, incredibly valuable to him. In terms of his worst, again, a bit like with Alex Pereira, I'm actually going to pick a fight that he won. I'm going to say the Steve Erceg one at UFC 301. One, he lost that fight quite clearly. I say 3-2, a lot of people even say 4-1 Erceg, and I don't think you can really argue with a 4-1. I don't think it was, but it's not a bad take. And if you look at what's happened to Steve Erceg since then, a little bit like with the Pereira against Bruno Silva argument, it's not been a good time for Steve Erceg since then. And if 99.9% of the MMA fan base, I think you lost that fight, and the guy has gone on to lose very, very devastatingly against Kara France, and then lose again quite soundly to Moreno as well. It's not a good look for Pantoja, so that's the main reason why I'm going to say it's his worst night for me. I mean, even the Askarov fight was quite close. He lost to, I think it was Dustin Ortiz, quite early in his UFC career. The Figueiredo one, it was a great fight to watch. And yes, he got beaten quite convincingly, but the performance itself was still good at a time when Figueiredo was by far and away the best flyweight on the planet. So I'm going to go with the Erceg fight as the worst, and his most recent against Kai Kara France at UFC 317 as his best. Let's move on to the former welterweight world champion, Mr. Kamaru Usman, who, in fairness, went on, I think it was a 15-fight win streak from his UFC debut up to the Leon Edwards head kick loss. I think he was 1 or 2 off of beating Silva's record for most consecutive UFC octagon wins. Unfortunately, obviously, he lost. So, sorry, Kamaru. In terms of his best performances, there are a lot to choose from. I mean, on the way up, he built quite an obvious reputation of being a boring fighter to watch, especially from a casual point of view. Like, if you appreciate grappling in MMA, then you liked Usman. If you didn't, then you didn't like him. I would consider myself mainly a purist, but even I got fucking bored of him a lot of the time. The Damian Maia fight was great. The fact he was able to take him down and completely neutralise the grappling of Damian Maia, which is incredibly dangerous with the submissions, was very, very impressive. The way he just completely dominated Woodley, and the first Masvidal fight was very, very good. I also think his last fight against Joaquin Buckley was a good showing as well, but I narrowed it down to 2. The Masvidal rematch and the Gilbert Burns fight. In terms of moments, I mean, the knockout of Gamebred was a fantastic moment, but I think the performance, if you consider everything, was better against Gilbert Burns, because 1, Masvidal did not deserve that immediate rematch, and 2, there was a lot on the line with Burns. There was a lot going on. They were really good friends and very close training partners for a fairly long period of time, and that was a big part of the build-up. The fact they know and understand each other's game quite a lot, and Usman handled that mentally far, far better than Burns did. This was also the fight where I thought to myself, okay, Usman may have one of the best jabs in the UFC. I mean, that link up with him and Trevor Whitman was probably what made him into the fighter that he become, because everybody knew that he could take anybody down and hold them there. That was always his bread and butter, but the jab out of both stances that he would have developed under Trevor was shown in all of its glory in this Gilbert Burns fight. It showed, 1, he was so good at what he could naturally do with the wrestling, and that he was evolving, and he was almost becoming the best version of himself. And I think we first really saw that in the Burns fight, and he took that momentum into the Masvidal knockout, as we all know. So I think that's his best night. His worst night, now he's obviously lost 3 fights in a row, so I'm going to have to pick one of those losses. And if you ask me, the Chimaev one, his overall kind of stock actually rose as a come in on short notice, a survive an early onslaught, and I think if that's a 5-round fight, he wins it. But it wasn't. It was a 3, and he lost 2-1 on the card, which was the correct scorecard, if you ask me. That leaves you with the 2 Leon Edwards fights. Now, again, I'm on about performances, not moments. In their second fight, the Headshot Dead fight, Kamaru was winning that relatively convincingly, and he got caught. The third fight at 286 in London at the O2, he lost over 5 rounds, clearly on what should have been all 3 cards. The only reason why it's a majority was obviously Leon had a pointer deducted. I think it was for cage grabs, I believe, which made a 48 and 47 Edwards card into a 47-47 draw. But the other 2 gave the fight 4-1 to Leon, which later, obviously, with the point, became 48-46. It's the only time that over a long length championship level fight, it's the only time he's ever been beaten over that distance, and I mean actually clearly beaten, which it says a lot about the resume of Usman and the quality of Usman. But in terms of an overall performance, he was a bit flat as well. Leon is able to defend against certain types of grappling. It seems like the Usman style of grappling he can deal with. Sean Brady is a little bit more of a cardio monster. He will shoot more and he doesn't mind if he doesn't get it. Whereas Usman will put everything he has into one takedown and he'll hold you there for the rest of the round if he gets it. Slightly different forms of wrestling. They need different forms of defence if you're a striker, which Leon is. And he shut Usman down for the most part. So I think that was his worst overall performance. It's weird actually. I was about to end the entry and a thought has just popped into my head. Best moment in Usman's career, the Masvidal knockout. Best performance was Burns. The worst moment in his career was the head kick. His worst overall performance was 286. I hope that kind of makes you understand the point of this video and what I'm trying to get across here. It's not about moments, it's about performances. Keep that in mind for later in the video. Justin Gaethje, best performance. It came down to 2 quite quickly. It was either UFC 291 in the rematch with Dustin Poirier, or it was 249 when he stopped the 12-fight winning streak of Tony Ferguson. You can make a very good argument for both, obviously. He was the guy that really ended Tony Ferguson at the top level, if you use hindsight to look back across what happens post the Gaethje fight. But I'm going to go with the Poirier rematch. Again, it's actually incredibly similar to what I was saying about Dustin in his Alvarez rematch, about taking reads and making adjustments. Now, of course, the Poirier-Gaethje rematch, there was a lot more time in between that than the Poirier-Alvarez rematch. But still, Gaethje learned from his mistakes, and starting with the Tony Ferguson fight, he became a lot more patient. That really helped him in the Poirier fight, and of course, you have to factor in the finish. It was the most composed but still dangerous version of Justin Gaethje that I think we've ever seen. And I think it's rightfully his best night. His worst night, UFC 300 Max Holloway. Right, this fight is so overrated in terms of as an overall product. Again, it's about overall performances, not moments. Now his worst moment was getting flatlined by Holloway, but his worst performance was also the Holloway fight. He was flat. He was just getting kind of pieced up quite badly, and a lot of the hyperbole around that, in fact all the hyperbole around that fight, is simply based on that last kind of 5, 6, 7 seconds of the thing, which was insane, and I was screaming my head off. I won't lie to you, but yeah, it's the flattest and the least effective we've ever seen Gaethje. Like, similarly to Poirier, even in his losses he has moments. I mean, if you listen to Khabib, one of the only shots he even landed on Khabib, as in Gaethje landed, was the hardest he's ever been hit. And he smacked his leg once, and apparently he could barely walk for a few days afterwards. That's a moment in a fight. He had moments in the Oliveira fight. He had moments in the Eddie Alvarez fight, in the first Dustin Poirier fight. This was the only fight that he's ever had where he hasn't looked in any way dynamic. He was poor. And if Max hadn't knocked him out in the last minutes, or last seconds of the fight, I should say, then it's not a fight of the year contender in any way. It's a beatdown from Max. So for me, it's his worst night on probably the biggest stage he's ever going to be on, which is a bit of a shame. And also, Gaethje, you don't just call for a title shot and expect to get it. Fight either Sarukian or Pimblet and shut up. Anyway, let's move on. Right, let's talk about Sean Strickland, former UFC middleweight champion. The best night of his career is quite self-explanatory. UFC 293, down under, dog walks Israel Adesanya, no pun intended. Now, I was going into that fight, and the main thoughts were that Adesanya wouldn't be able to finish Sean. Right, former UFC middleweight champion Sean Strickland. Let's talk about his best and worst nights. The best one is the most obvious on this entire list. UFC 293. He dog-walked Adesanya, no pun intended. Now, I actually watched that fight back quite recently on the UFC's YouTube. I think it was posted before the rematch of Strickland and DDP or something like that. The fact that Adesanya, at one point, he was billed as this elusive, mystical striker, Anderson Silva 2.0, and all that Sean had to do was just teep him to the solar plexus once every 3 or 4 minutes, and then just 1-2 him, maybe throw a left hook on the end for 25 minutes. And he nearly finished him in the first round. I'm surprised he survived that, really. The issue with Sean's win over Adesanya is what's happened since. And a lot of people are almost kind of taking Sean's win away from him because of that. I think that's unfair. You can only beat who's in front of you at the time that they are in front of you. And at the time, he just knocked out Alex. And he was back on top of the world again. Sean's ability to keep himself safe from Adesanya's attacks, all across head and body and leg, was the most impressive thing I've ever seen him do. His defence that night was superb, and his offence was enough to outland and outstrike Adesanya. And he became the champion that night, so it's obviously his best night. His worst night, I was considering the Duplessis rematch because it wasn't a particularly great performance. He had a couple of shaky ones earlier in his career, but I kind of wanted to focus more on the modern side of things, because he did get knocked out pretty badly as a welterweight. I think it was by Alessi dos Santos, I think. Could be wrong with that. I'm going to go with the Pereira knockout loss at 276, I think it was, on the Adesanya Cannonier card, International Fight Week, if memory serves. Why you would stand with your chin up in the air in front of a two-weight glory kickboxing champion, one of the scariest guys in the world. Why would you just stand in front of him? Just dive at his legs. If he knees you in the face, fair enough. I'm not saying you just have to grapple with him. Just at least try and take him down in the first round. Wear him out a little bit. Make him a bit less dangerous. And then you can maybe try and, teep him and walk him down in rounds 2 and 3. I don't know. Don't just stand in front of him, you hobnob. It was annoying. And it was some of the worst fight IQ I've ever seen. So, Sean, it was your worst night, mate. Let's talk about two absolute legends who are featuring on the UFC Nashville card to close out the video, starting with the headliner, Mr. Derek Lewis. Now, he's had a lot of fantastic nights, a lot of fantastic moments. The Volkov come from behind knockout on the Conor against Khabib card was fantastic. But again, that's a moment, not a performance, as I said earlier in the video. I thought he looked very, very good. Quite recently against, obviously, a De Lima was a very, very quick knockout. He showed exactly what he is about. The Tybura fight was good. He showed he can win a fight over 5 rounds. I think it was the Tybura fight that went 5 rounds. Or it may have been the Abdurakhimov, or it may have been both. But either way, his best night, for me, in terms of overall performance, was Curtis Blades. Blades, at this point, I believe, had only lost to Ngannou twice, but I think he'd only lost against Francis Ngannou. I might be wrong. I'm talking in the UFC, this is. I think it was only Ngannou that had beaten him to this point. And as much as Blades had a modicum of a success in the earlier part of the fight, Derek Lewis actually showed that he does have a bit of a brain in there. He's not just swinging haymakers. He timed the uppercut onto a diving in Curtis Blades perfectly. Blades diving in Curtis Blades perfectly. One of the most well-timed, accurate shots he's landed in his entire career, if not the best, against a very, very good top heavyweight contender in Curtis Blades. Now, in terms of his worst nights, he has had a couple of stinkers in there as old Del Boy. I almost put the Ngannou fight in there, even though he won. Obviously, I think he had a bad back and Ngannou was a bit gun-shy after losing to Stipe. I think that was why that fight was so bad, I believe, if memory serves. He looked really out of sorts against Cyril Gane in Houston for the interim belt. The DC fight was a bad look. Being knocked out by Mark Hunt is not particularly shameful. I'm going to go with the Spivak fight, because that was the time where I looked at Lewis and thought, yeah, it's over now. It's kind of difficult to explain, because Derek Lewis always looks slightly uninterested. It's kind of the way that he fights. He doesn't look particularly interested in learning how to be the best MMA fighter. He just wants to knock you clean out, which has worked mainly, in fact almost always, throughout his career. But when I was watching the Spivak fight, and I actually stayed up to watch that one. I don't normally watch Apex cards because they're not particularly exciting, but I love Derek Lewis, so I thought, why not? I looked at him and I just thought, yeah, the gimmick and the trick. Effectively, the sport has moved on past the Derek Lewises of the world. They can't exist in the modern space of MMA. Because he literally just got taken down straight away. He just basically gave up very quickly. It was very, very difficult to see. Now he's won 3 of his last 4 and looks really, really good. And I believe he'll get another win against Teixeira on Saturday night. But, yeah, that was a poor night for Derek Lewis. Hard to watch as a big fan of the man. But, yeah, they were the best and worst nights of Derek Lewis, in my humble opinion. But let's finish with the co-mainer of UFC Nashville, Wonderboy Thompson. Now, Wonderboy is one of these fighters who has definitely had a career of two halves. In the early, the early stages of his career, into the mid stages of his time with the UFC, he was the best striker in the division by a country mile. And yes, he was susceptible to wrestlers, but it was almost at a time where the sport was moving in to the modern era, but it wasn't quite there yet. And this random karate bloke could bamboozle elite and level fighters without even breaking a sweat. That changed pretty much after he lost against Tyron Woodley at UFC 209. But either way, I'm going to start on the high note and then finish on the bad note. His best night for me was Vicente Luque. It showed you everything that Wonderboy was about. It was on the BMF card at Madison Square Garden. He broke both of his hands on the head of Luque. One, that shows how much he was able to land on Luque, and 2, it shows how tough Luque was, and he is still now. It was one of the most quintessential classic displays of pure striking in MMA that I have ever seen. And there were a lot of other options. The wins over Ellenberger and Hendricks early in his career were definitely on the list. I nearly picked them. It was really nice to see almost a bit of a vintage Wonderboy against Kevin Holland in Orlando quite recently. But I went with the Luque one because I think that is one of the purest and most concrete, clear examples of how good Wonderboy can be in a fight that maybe stylistically suits him. And it's a credit to Luque for being able to take the shots that Wonderboy was landing to allow Wonderboy to show how good he was, really. Worst night for Wonderboy Thompson. He has had some losses. I would say the worst moment would be the Superman Punch loss against Anthony Pettis, which I believe was also in Nashville or somewhere in Tennessee, I think. Maybe, I could be wrong. It's definitely down south in the States somewhere. That was probably worst moment. He's had some relatively dominant losses. I mean, the Bilal Muhammad one comes to mind. The Gilbert Burns one was a really bad look for him, to be honest. But I'm going to go with the Joaquin Buckley one because, yes, he'd been knocked out in the past, obviously, like I just said. Anthony Pettis was the guy that did it, but he was very convincingly winning the Pettis fight. This Buckley fight, he was obviously losing at the grappling. He doesn't really have the ability to out-grapple anybody, and that's not his style, so we won't hold that against him. But the Pettis one, it felt like a lucky shot. The Buckley one was something that Buckley was able to pick up on from the way that Wonderboy was circling around the cage and the way that he was shifting his weight. And he was able to make the read on Wonderboy, catch him and knock him out, which hasn't happened. And I really thought he should have retired that night. He didn't. He's still about. He's still kicking about. It's old Wonderboy, and here he is again. So we'll see what he can do against Gabriel Bonfirm on Saturday night. I believe he loses again and retires, but we will see what happens on the night. But yeah, the best night for me was Luque, and the worst night for me was Joaquin Buckley. Now, chaps, that will wrap us up for some more of the best and worst performances of some of the UFC's biggest names. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, let me know. Leave a like. And I'll speak to you very soon. Enjoy the Nashville card if I don't speak to you before then. I don't think I will. I don't plan on uploading tomorrow, so enjoy the fights. It's, on paper, the headliner looks weak, and it's not a particularly good headliner in the big year of 2025. But the card looks very, very good. You've got, obviously, Thompson's back. Lewis against a Teixeira will be what it will be. It'll be a couple of big boys having a go at each other. Garcia against Cater is a good fight. The debut at heavyweight of Petrino looks quite interesting. Obviously, Nate Landwehr against Charriere is a great fight on paper. It should be a really good night. I hope you enjoy. And I'll speak to you double soon. See you later.